The SAFe curriculum has been changing over time. And in my interpretation, it has created more distributed material across the different classes, or has distributed the material across the different classes. Now, the PO/PM class, it probably has about 75% or 80% PO related specific material, and the rest is PM, right? Then you have the LPM class, which is more focused on the expected practices and techniques that a product manager would need to do in order to bring stuff into that funnel that become the strategic themes. The leading phase class is becoming more and more about what I think its original intent was, which was to provide guidance for the leadership to understand and undertake an agile transformation. In the past, the SAFe leadership or leading SAFe class has sort of been this introduction to SAFe that a lot of folks were taking. It was sort of the Scrum Master class of the team level Scrum Master back in the day, if you remember, right? So what I'm seeing in the SAFe curriculum is this now more specialized material finding a home in the respective offerings. What's your take on that?
I completely agree. I think this is, I haven't talked to the Scale Agile folks in terms of strategy, but the LPM you mentioned, the DevOps is another one. A class I took a couple years ago, very focused. It's not deep DevOps. It's not technical. Here's how hands-on how you do the practices, but in terms of the concepts, they've got this calmer model. It's very focused there. And then you and I just talked about, but for everybody's awareness, SAFe definitely Scaled Agile decided to focus on that with their APM class. So we were just saying, I was actually part of, lucky enough to help create that one out in Boulder. And it was designed not just for SAFe product managers, but for product managers working in agile environments in general. And it does go into, if you said, and I think this is right, that the SAFe PO/PM class is 75% PO focused and maybe 25% product manager focused. The reverse is true, maybe even more, maybe 90%, 10%. When you look at the APM class, it is probably 90% focus on product management and not necessarily SAFe product management, just good product management practices in general. So I think I've seen the same thing. It is becoming more, niche classes, which I think is great. It certainly, we were talking about, especially for product management, it's one where most of the leading agile organizations don't seem to have classes that focus on beyond basic product ownership.
One of the challenges we have is when we're starting an engagement with a client or an organization that's going to go on a transformation, well, we have to choose which are those training opportunities that are needed most. And they tend to be in all of these areas. Now, if you're a large enterprise, we can offer training and bring the product owners and bring the product managers to those different classes and bring the leaders into LLP. What happens if you're an organization that is smaller? And now to have those individuals means, having a class of 4 or 5 people. Of course, we work around that and we find the solutions for that, whether it be joining a larger class or whether it be finding a class that has a combination of material for that. But I find that there's a need also for that customization, which, to be honest, SAFe doesn't have that curriculum customization flexibility that we might find in other frameworks, right? Or in other classes.
Yeah, very, very standard, right? So the expectation is you're not going to make a whole lot of changes. And if people do want to take the exam, you really can't. There's a ton of material that has to be covered. I am curious though, Ernesto, you said something in there. I still, and maybe it's starting to change, but I still view that leading SAFe class. If you're trying to get folks into SAFe, that leading SAFe class, I do think is a pretty good overview. Are you finding that, because you mentioned before, it used to be more of a great introductory class. Maybe you feel that since they've added the competencies and things, it is far more targeted to executives than it used to be?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing, and it's still I'm lack of a better term calling it the catch-all. That's certainly not fair to the class. It is geared toward the leadership. It has a purpose, and that is to prepare the individuals that are going to lead the transformation in SAFe to understand and have the right mindset. But as the competencies have grown in size and richness, there needs to be room for that, and it has been at the cost of taking some other materials. For example, estimating is pretty thinned out now, right? If it is in there at all, which I don't think. And you could argue, look, a leading SAFe class, there's no reason to teach estimation in that, right? On the other hand, find it useful when the leadership understands what these point things that we're throwing around all day are about, right? So that they're not weaponizing those, or that they're understanding their purpose. So it is taking from some areas, and the right areas, by the way. I don't disagree with them. I just almost, I miss that. There seems to be a gap of the class that is for a transformational organization's transformation that might not be a large enterprise that has the luxury of segmenting their training into 5 or 6 different classes.
Yeah, it's fair. I wonder, you've made me think about other frameworks and whether or not they have a different take. And I know, both you and I know Scrum at Scale. And I think there we do have the foundations class, which is short, right? It's only, if I remember right, it's just a 4-hour class, and it is something that everybody can get engaged in. It is, because of its brevity, though, it's so high level. I wonder if it can really stand alone. Maybe it's not really intended to.
I agree. That's a great point. And I think that the place for the foundation class is for folks to orient to what the framework is, and whether it is something that they want to explore further. And then there's the 2-day class for the practitioner. There's this Scrum Scale Product Owner. Then we get into the specialty roles. In fact, the educational agile program that you just referenced, which is where the Scrum Scale Practitioner certification is under, just had a new credential announced, which is the team activation. And it's a 1-day class, and it's for purposes of getting the developers to understand agility and the things necessary. So you're seeing the more compressed delivery of the information in such a way that allows it to work in maybe smaller size organizations that may not be rolling out a full training, month or 2 months of classes for the organization.
It's, and Ernesto, this may take us in a different direction, but I'm curious because I just started taking a new class with an excellent agilist. And one of the things that he talks about is whether or not we as coaches, as trainers, are following some of the training industry best practices. So, and what he would say is, and I'm curious, like with our SAFe training, any 2-day workshops, we know already that it's overwhelming. And I wonder if, almost the idea of starting with that agile education program, the foundations class, something shorter, something that is 4 hours a day. And as I say this, I recognize we can do that with SAFe for Teams. We can do that with other SAFe classes, break it down into 4-hour segments. A lot of my clients don't want that. They really want to get it done. And I guess I'm wondering if you have a viewpoint on how much maybe we should push back against that. What your experience is.
Great question. And one that doesn't get old. I've had this conversation in different domains at different times of the TAM, right? The technology adoption model. And now that we're in the, I believe, the mature stages or entering the mature stages of agility as far as industry practices, we're beginning to ask ourselves, is customization a better fit than standardization when it comes to training or when it comes to coaching, right? And my answer, it depends. It depends on the organization. I normally see two forces at work when it comes to deciding on whether a training class should be a certified training class or whether it should be a customization delivery for the organization. And the two are the leadership preferring the customization part because, well, what do leaders care about? They care about results, as they should, right? We want this to fit well for how we are doing it. And we don't care about those certification things that you're putting labels on. What we want is our people to do this right. Excellent. The unspoken part of that is the individual in the organization who wants a certification for resume purposes, for credential purposes, for longevity in their career as far as the path that they're going to follow, and is being shy about admitting that and succumbing to the statement that, yeah, we of course we want to learn how to do this and we don't care about certification. But then you have the class surveys and most of the people who attended care about receiving the certification, right? And you usually have those two forces, right? They've been perpetually at odds with each other. Our job as trainers and as coaches to understand the local culture, understand the purpose of the training and how we might be able to meet them where they are.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think both you and I have found, you say that the surveys and just informal discussions, people really want those certifications. So for employers out there, I think that's something to consider, even if people do tell you otherwise, that from a taking care of your people standpoint, this is a feather in their quiver, if you will. But I think your answer makes a lot of sense in terms of, is it standardization or is it customization? I think you and I we've been part of some of these programs. I know we just did some training together as part of one that fits into this. And that is, ideally as coaches, I think where we want to be is, even if we have some level of standardization to start, right? We deliver a SAFe teams, a Scrum at Scale foundations. Ideally, when we launch the teams, we really want to be ingrained, right? We want to be able to see, and to me, that's what great coaching is. You have to find spot issues. People aren't going to recognize everything from the training. So the ability to spend the next, at least, let's say 6 weeks with those teams part-time, see what's going on in the events and give them fast feedback seems like, to me, that's the best case scenario where you can really have an impact. They still get the advantages of the certification. And at the same time, from a business perspective, you get to focus them on the most important parts of Agile done right? Because there's a million things they could improve. And this is one of the things I know you and I have talked about before, and I'm really big on, is just trying to, at least at the start, get them focused on what are the big rocks, what are the biggest levers. And it's darn near impossible to do without some spot coaching after the training.
Completely agree. And I myself am at the point where when organizations reach out for seeking training, I'm having that combined conversation right out the gate,
Yeah.
because one without the other is doing a disservice to the other, right? The same and the opposite, right? When an organization wants coaching but hasn't had training, it makes that an uphill battle as well. They really go hand in hand. And I tend to shorten that conversation with, look, training is about imparting knowledge. We have interactive discussions in that training, but there's one objective, and that is to impart this body of knowledge onto you. However we do that, we may have different styles as trainers, but we know our objective, and that is for you to absorb this knowledge. Coaching is inspecting and adapting on the job. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's looking at those muscle memory anti-patterns and begin correcting them through items that we work through on a daily basis with the individuals, right? My oldest son was a diver, and I would go to diving competitions, the Olympic diving. And before that, the training was fascinating to me, because I would see the coach just on the side of the pool. He would do his dive. And when he comes out, the very first thing he did every time he came out of the water was look to the right. And there was the coach giving them the tips on the things to self-correct around, right? And he would go right back up and jump again from the platform and make the same mistake again. And there was the coach telling them, yeah. And he would go and do it again, and they would do it over and over. By the end of the day, he had just chipped away one small anti-pattern that he could, the next time around, they worked on something else. So knowing is not practicing, right? And the act of imparting that knowledge and training does need to be paired with that on-the-job self-correcting part that we provide as coaches.
I love it. What a great example too, right? About the value of coaching and why we say we do things differently. It's just that important to get that fast feedback. It's something we talk about in agility in general. And I think any good coach adopts that mindset. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And I think also from a leadership perspective, when we talk about transforming the organization and the need for bringing the leadership into that transformation so that they are owning the transformation, right? Both SAFe and Scrum Scale are very, very clear about the fact that a transformation works best when it's a top-down or led by the leaders. And in fact, they're very vocal about the fact that a bottom-up agile transformation at the organizational level doesn't work, right? You could have small pockets of resistance, if you will, that begin to create that necessary momentum. But at some point, there needs to be an organized effort that is led by the leadership. And if the leadership themselves don't understand what they're getting into, if what they're trying to do is swipe a credit card and get a box and pull the stuff out of the box and plug it in, well, we know that doesn't work as well, because the principles, the values, the mindset, the approach, they need to be led by example, and the organization as a whole needs to exhibit that in order for them to continue to mature in their agility. So bringing the leaders into that training, we're going back now to leading SAFe, being more oriented around that, but also coaching the leaders and possibly mentoring those leaders on an ongoing basis. As we engage organizations, we have the team mindset, and we want those teams to be doing it well so that we can amplify the benefits and not the problems as we continue to scale and grow. We want to work with the leadership so that they understand what these things are and coach them through it. And then we want to mentor so that as the organization continues to mature, we are continuing to remain on that agile path and not reset to all the habits. Right?
Yes, I'll say too, I've got a great example of that. Mid-transformation, we've got a client right now, somebody you're familiar with. We are, and I think this is an effective way to transform, but we're doing it in pieces, right? We're taking certain parts of the organization and helping them transform, getting that reference model, sometimes we call it, getting them up and going and understanding. And what we see here is, so there's benefits of doing it that way. But one of the challenges is that, well, then you've got other parts of the organization that haven't gone through that training yet, that even if they want to be agile, their behaviors do things that get in the way. So we've still got some of these leaders, for example, who want the weekly status meeting with a big red, yellow, and green chart, and everybody sits in a meeting for an hour, hour and a half, listens to other people that they may not even need to interact with, but it's convenient for the leaders as a way to consume the status, right? For everybody else, it's a waste of time. It's the opposite of servant leadership, if you will, right? Very leader focused. But and that's a small example, but a good one, that until we bring along those parts of the organization, it's going to be a problem. And even, Ernesto, if we talk about something like leading SAFe, there's nowhere in leading SAFe that says, hey, leader, stop your status meetings, right? Stop your red, yellow, and green charts. They don't work for us. There's nothing that says, hey, forget about your red, yellow, and green being plan driven, right? They kind of imply these things. But to your point, that's why I think that ongoing coaching, there's no substitute for it. If we can't coach those leaders through these problems as we go, they will continue to exhibit problems that are going to undermine what the rest of the organization is trying to do.
I agree. Now I'm gonna offer an additional thought here, because too often I think because there's so much room for agility at the leadership level, we tend to paint the leaders as these bad people that need to be brought in, and we need to transform the leaders. All true, all true. So in the spirit of finding something positive in there, I'm going to offer that Brian Levy said something very smart. He says many smart things. One thing that I remember relative to this was the difference that I see between coaching a leader and coaching a team member is that leaders tend to be more comfortable with ambiguity than individuals tend to be, right? And that can help a lot when it comes to adopting an agile mindset, because one of the things we coach around in Agile is that we don't know what we don't know, but we're going to estimate to the best of our abilities. And leaders tend to be very good about that. When I coach around that at the team level, I find a lot more pushback when it comes to, no, we must know what these items mean and how we're going to deliver them and when, because if we don't have clarity, we can't do it. And the idea of inspecting and adapting as we go because we don't know the rest of it doesn't sit well with a lot of developers sometimes, or individual teams, or scrum of scrums, depending on the composition that we're using. But when I have that conversation with a leader and say, look, here's what we know. These are the high level initiatives, and these are the things that we're going to go after. And these are the high level estimates for those, but they could be wrong. We're going to inspect and adapt as we go. And the leader says, I'm good with that. Just give me a general guideline and a time horizon, right? So from a ambiguity perspective, from the ability to adapt into the future and know that we don't know it all, the leadership tends to be a good group of folks. And I find that to be optimistic, right?
Yeah. Well, and let me agree. I'm big on let's not blame the leaders. I hear a lot of that in our space. The leaders are the problem. Well, how do we help them then? Right? We can't just leave it there. You made me recognize, though, I throw the term leader around, and I talk about this in some of my classes simply because I know I do that. What you just described to me is probably a very senior leader. Sometimes, and I know people would question this, and I think it's a fair question. I'm even putting anybody outside of the team structure as a quote leader, which the reality is they may be more supervisors, they may be more managers, and I think those different levels probably come with a different, on average, a different comfort level with ambiguity. So excellent point, and something we can use too, right? No question about it. It might help us get them bought in with the honesty that, unlike some other plans that they've probably seen in the past, that we're going to transform your organization in the next 24 months, and here's exactly what it's going to look like. By month 6, we'll achieve this level of maturity by month 9, right? And I think you and I probably take a more nuanced view that every organization is different enough. What we can promise you is a method, right, that's going to inspect and adapt, and transparency into where we are leaders, so that you can see that. And then we can talk about, well, do we need to go a different direction?
Yeah, by the way, you make a precious point. We throw the word leader around.
I certainly do.
As if it's this person, right?
That's right.
And
that's right.
You and I have been in engagements together where identifying the business owner itself has been a task.
Right.
Well, many conversations and involving different people. And I thought I was the business. Oh, I thought you were the business owner. SAFe has the role of the business owner. And if you look at the description, good luck trying to identify who that person is by that definition, right? Someone who's ultimately responsible for business outcome.
That's right.
Could be a million people.
Right. It's a new concept for a lot of folks. Responsible.
So it is important and on us to be more precise about how we use that word. And I will take a note for myself on that, in that as well, right? Even within teams, I just had a conversation with a client today where that came up, right? When we were talking about leaders, their perceptions were these were technical leaders. In other words, individuals in the Scrum team for the moment and before we start the transformation. So you mentioned supervisors, you mentioned managers. Sometimes there's even within the Scrum team and a pattern that we need to address, right?
It's excellent. And I'll say, Ernesto, I don't know if it's for this conversation, but you just reminded me that one of the ones that clients often ask about is they don't understand what we consider the Agile team. So trying to draw that box for clients to say, these are team members, but we don't consider these other people team members. They're important. It could be a technical architect or something that, and the client might say, well, what do you mean they're not team members? They play a role, right? The team can't do their work without them. And I'm noticing a lot more, maybe I'm recognizing this distinction more than I did in the past, that not just with leaders, but with any role, the clients are sometimes more confused when they're newer to what an Agile team structure looks like as to what a team member is. And even for us Agilists, I would say sometimes there's disagreement because we talk about team formation and sometimes we have part-time team members, right? Maybe that technical architect is a team member, but they're only 50% of the time. Well, what if they're only 25% of the time, right? Are they still team members or are they a SME, right? A subject matter expert who's outside the team. So that might be taking it a little too far afoot for this conversation based on where we started, but maybe that's for another day.
Well, that's the beauty of this, right? It goes in whichever direction the topic takes us. And I'll add to that because I do think it's very relevant in connecting now how we do what we do. You and I both recognized at some point in our engagements that it's very important to be clear right from the get-go. And one of the artifacts that I use at the beginning of an engagement is a team roster from their view and no one else's. Show me the scope of the teams and their individual and their participants and their roles and their percentage of time in their teams. with no alteration. And then let's have the conversation around what this means from a composition standpoint. Are there potential recommendations and improvements that we can make around that? But before that artifact, we were blindsided quite a lot by exactly what you just described, right? Well, I thought you were the Scrum Master. Well, I thought I was a Scrum Master. Well, yeah, we have a Scrum Master, but that Scrum Master is a person that is in 20 teams and they come in once in a while, right? So getting that clarity as part of the onboarding process of the coach so that the proper conversations can take place from there, it's a very important step. Right?
Great point. No question about it.
All right. We took this one longer than we normally do, but how could we not?
Yeah. Fun to talk.
Good stuff.